The Sea of Galilee stretched out before them, quiet and serene in the twilight. The soft ripple of waves against the shore created a gentle rhythm, a calming presence in the midst of the disciples' restlessness. They had been traveling with Jesus for many months now, witnessing the miraculous healings and listening to his profound teachings. Yet despite everything they had experienced, each one of them still carried their own struggles, burdens that weighed heavily on their hearts and minds. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the water, Jesus led his disciples to a quiet place on a hillside overlooking the sea. The day had been long, and the disciples were weary, not just from the physical journey, but from the thoughts that constantly churned in their minds. They had witnessed many of Jesus' miracles, healing the sick, calming the storm, raising the dead, yet they still struggled with the storms within themselves. Jesus, sensing their unease, sat down on the grass and gestured for his disciples to join him. They gathered around him, their hearts open, waiting for the wisdom that would pour from his lips. The air was still, and the only sound was the gentle rustle of the wind through the olive trees. "My friends," Jesus began, his voice calm and soothing, "I know that many of you carry burdens in your hearts. You are troubled by fears of the future, by regrets of the past, and by the noise that fills your minds. But tonight I want to speak to you about something deeper. I want to tell you about the peace that comes from being fully present, from being aware of this moment, and from trusting in God's love." The disciples listened intently. They had often heard Jesus speak about peace and trust, but tonight there was something different in his tone. It was as if he was inviting them into a new understanding, a deeper awareness of the inner peace they longed for but hadn't yet found. Jesus began to tell them a story, one that would resonate deeply with the struggles they each carried in their hearts. His voice was soft, yet every word seemed to sink into their souls like water into dry ground. "There was once a man," Jesus said, "who lived in a bustling city, much like the towns we have passed through on our journey. This man, like many others, spent his days consumed by the demands of life, always working, always striving, always thinking about what needed to be done next. His mind was never at rest. He was always worried about the future, always regretting the past, and always searching for something that seemed just out of reach." The disciples nodded in understanding. They too often felt this way. Life with Jesus had its share of uncertainties. The path ahead was unclear, filled with both hope and danger. Each of them carried the weight of their own thoughts, often struggling to find the peace that Jesus spoke of so often. "This man," Jesus continued, "grew weary of the constant noise in his mind. He longed for peace, for a moment of stillness where his heart could rest. And so, he decided to leave his city and go on a journey. He believed that if he could only find the right place, a quiet mountain, a distant village, somewhere far away from the demands of life, then he would finally find peace." The disciples leaned in, captivated by the unfolding story. They could see themselves in the traveler, always seeking, always searching for something that seemed elusive. "The man traveled far and wide," Jesus said, "climbing mountains, crossing rivers, visiting temples, and seeking out wise men. But no matter where he went, his mind was still restless. The thoughts that had plagued him in the city followed him on his journey. He couldn't escape them no matter how far he traveled. The future still frightened him, and the past still haunted him." At this, a few of the disciples exchanged glances. They, too, had tried to run from their own thoughts, believing that if they could change their circumstances they would find peace. But now, listening to Jesus, they realized that peace couldn't be found in a place or a change of scenery. It was something deeper. "One day," Jesus said, "the man found himself sitting by a river, utterly exhausted. He had traveled for months, but peace still eluded him. In his frustration he cried out to God, 'Why can I not find peace? What must I do to quiet my mind?' And then a wise old man appeared, sitting nearby. The old man had been watching the traveler for some time and could see the suffering in his heart. He smiled gently and said, 'Peace does not come from escaping your thoughts or running away from your life. Peace comes from being fully present, right here in this moment. Jesus paused, letting the words settle into the hearts of his disciples. They could feel the weight of the traveler's journey, his desperation for peace, and the simple yet profound truth spoken by the old man. The traveler, Jesus continued, looked at the old man confused. "But how can I be present," he asked, "when my mind is filled with so many worries and fears? How can I find peace when my thoughts never stop?" "Your thoughts are like the river," the old man said, pointing to the flowing water. "They come and go, sometimes fast, sometimes slow. But you are not the river. You are the one watching the river. When you learn to observe your thoughts without becoming lost in them, you will find the peace you seek." The disciples sat in silence, each of them absorbing the meaning of the story. They had spent so much time caught up in their own thoughts, fearing the future, regretting the past, trying to control what they couldn't. But now they understood that peace wasn't about silencing their thoughts. It was about learning to observe them without getting swept away. Peter, always the first to speak, felt a stirring in his heart. He had been listening closely to Jesus, but now the weight of his own struggles rose to the surface. He had always been the bold one, the one to step forward when others hesitated. But deep inside, Peter was often consumed by fears of failure, of not being strong enough to live up to the calling Jesus had given him. "Master," Peter said, his voice low, "I hear your words, but I find it so difficult to quiet my mind. I'm always thinking about what could go wrong, about the mistakes I've made and the challenges ahead. How do I stop my thoughts from overwhelming me?" Jesus turned to Peter, his eyes filled with love and understanding. He knew Peter's heart, the passion, the fear, the burden of trying to carry too much on his own. "Peter," Jesus said gently, "you are like the traveler in the story, always trying to control the future, always burdened by the past. But the future is not yours to carry, and the past is already gone. All you have is this moment, and in this moment, God is with you. You do not need to silence your thoughts, but learn to watch them like the river. Let them come and go, and trust that God's peace is always with you." Peter nodded, feeling both comforted and challenged by Jesus' words. He had spent so much time trying to be strong, trying to live up to what he thought was expected of him. But now he realized that true strength came from surrendering, not to fear but to the present moment, to the love and peace that God offered him. "Master," Peter said softly, I will try to be present, to trust in the peace you speak of." Jesus smiled, his hand resting gently on Peter's shoulder. "You are strong, Peter, not because you can control the future but because you are loved. Remember this, and you will find the peace you seek." As Peter fell silent, John, the disciple closest to Jesus, spoke next. He had always been contemplative, often lost in his own thoughts, his heart filled with questions about life, love, and the nature of God. Yet even he struggled to stay present, to quiet the noise of his mind. "Master," John said, his voice soft, "I often feel like I'm missing the beauty of the moment because my mind is so full of thoughts. I want to be present, but I'm always thinking about what I should do, what I should say. How do I learn to quiet my mind?" Jesus looked at John with deep affection. He knew the purity of John's heart, his desire to understand and to love fully. But he also knew that John, like the others, was often caught in the web of his own thoughts, distracted by his search for answers. "John," Jesus said gently, "your thoughts are like clouds passing through the sky. Sometimes they are heavy, sometimes light. But you are not the clouds. You are the sky itself, vast, open, always present. When your thoughts pull you away, do not fight them. Simply observe them and gently bring yourself back to this moment. The more you practice this, the more you will feel the presence of God in every breath, in every heartbeat." John listened carefully, understanding the metaphor. He had often tried to push his thoughts away, believing that peace would come only when his mind was completely clear. But now he saw that peace was about learning to be with his thoughts without being controlled by them. "I will try, Master," John said, "to be like the sky, to watch the clouds without getting lost in them." Jesus smiled, his heart full of love for his beloved disciple. Yes, John. You will find that when you allow yourself to simply observe without judgment, you will feel more connected to the present moment, and in that moment you will find peace. The night had deepened, and the fire crackled softly as the disciples sat in quiet reflection. Each one of them had been touched by Jesus' words, feeling the weight of their thoughts and burdens begin to lift. But there was one among them who still carried a heavy heart: Matthew, the former tax collector. Matthew had left behind his old life when Jesus called him to follow, but he still carried the guilt of his past. He had betrayed his own people for money, extorted from the poor, and lived a life of greed. Even though Jesus had welcomed him with open arms, Matthew struggled to forgive himself. "Master," Matthew said, his voice trembling, "I have left behind my old life, but the weight of it still follows me. How do I let go of the guilt I carry? How do I forgive myself for the wrongs I've done?" Jesus, with deep compassion in his eyes, moved closer to Matthew. He knew the depth of Matthew's guilt, the way it had shaped him, the way it kept him from fully accepting the new life he had been given. "Matthew," Jesus said softly, "your past does not define you. You are not the man you once were. You have been forgiven by God, and now you must learn to forgive yourself. The guilt you carry is like a heavy chain, keeping you bound to a life that no longer exists. Let it go. Let yourself be free. God's love has already washed over you, making you new." Matthew's eyes filled with tears, his heart aching with both sorrow and relief. He had spent so long punishing himself, believing that he didn't deserve forgiveness. But now, hearing Jesus' words, he realized that the only thing holding him back from peace was his own refusal to accept it. "But how, Master?" Matthew asked, his voice cracking with emotion. "How do I forgive myself when I still feel the weight of my sins?" Jesus reached out and took Matthew's hands in his own. "By being present, Matthew. By realizing that this moment is new, and that each breath you take is a gift from God. The past is gone, and the future has not yet come. All you have is this moment, and in this moment you are forgiven. You are loved. You are free." Matthew wept openly, the chains of guilt that had bound him for so long finally breaking. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air fill his lungs, feeling the presence of God surrounding him. For the first time in years he felt truly free. As Matthew wiped his tears, feeling a new lightness in his heart, another disciple spoke up: Thomas, the one known for his questioning nature. Thomas had always struggled with doubt, not just in Jesus but in himself. He often wondered if he was worthy of the calling, if he had the strength to walk the path that Jesus had laid before them. "Master," Thomas said, his voice thoughtful, "I often doubt, not you but myself. I doubt whether I'm capable of staying present when my mind is filled with so much uncertainty. How do I trust when my heart is full of questions?" Jesus turned to Thomas with deep understanding. He knew that Thomas's doubts did not come from a lack of faith, but from a deep desire to understand, to be certain in a world full of uncertainties. "Thomas," Jesus said, "your questions are not a sign of weakness but of your longing for truth. It is okay to have questions, to seek understanding. But do not let your questions pull you away from the present. When your heart is full of uncertainty, return to the truth that is always here, the truth that you are loved by God, and that God is with you in every breath you take. Trust that the answers will come in time, but for now, rest in the knowledge that you are held by God's love." Thomas let out a small sigh, his heart feeling both seen and comforted. He had often struggled with the tension between faith and doubt, feeling that his questions made him less worthy. But now, hearing Jesus' words, he understood that his doubts were part of his journey, and that they did not separate him from God's love. "I will try, Master," Thomas said softly, "to trust in the love that is always with me, even when I don't have all the answers." Jesus smiled, his heart full of affection for Thomas. "Yes, Thomas. You will find that as you learn to rest in the present, the answers you seek will come, not from the mind but from the heart, where God's love dwells." The fire had burned low and the night had grown deep, but the disciples were still gathered around Jesus, their hearts full of peace. Each one of them had been touched by his words, by the gentle wisdom that had led them away from the chaos of their minds and into the stillness of the present moment. Jesus stood, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the dying fire. He looked at each of his disciples with love, each one of them unique, each one of them precious in the eyes of God. "My dear friends," Jesus said softly, "peace is not something you must strive for. It is something you can find in every moment, by simply being present, by being aware of God's presence with you. When your thoughts pull you away, when your mind feels like a storm, remember this: God is with you, right here, right now. You do not need to escape your thoughts. You only need to come back to the moment, to the love that surrounds you." The disciples nodded, their hearts lighter, their minds quieter. They had been so focused on their struggles, their fears, their regrets. But now they understood that peace was not something they had to chase. It was something they could find in the present moment, where God's love was always waiting for them. As they rose and began to walk back toward their camp, the disciples felt a deep sense of contentment. They had learned that the greatest journey was not to a distant land or a far-off future, but within themselves, into the quiet stillness of the present, where God's peace awaited them. The next morning, the disciples awoke to the sound of birds singing in the trees, the sun casting a warm glow over the hills. They had slept peacefully, their minds free from the worries and fears that had once consumed them. As they gathered together for the day ahead, they felt a new sense of clarity, a new sense of purpose. Peter, always the first to act, turned to Jesus with a renewed spirit. "Master," he said, "I have always tried to be strong, to lead. But now I see that true strength comes from being present, from trusting in the love that surrounds us." Jesus smiled at Peter, pleased with his understanding. "Yes, Peter. True strength comes not from striving, but from surrendering to the moment, to the love of God that is always with you." John too felt a new sense of peace. He had always been contemplative, always searching for answers, but now he understood that the answers he sought were not outside of him, but within. "Master," he said, "I will try to be like the sky, to watch my thoughts without being controlled by them. I will trust in the peace that comes from being present." Matthew, still feeling the lightness of forgiveness, smiled softly. "I will forgive myself, Master, and trust that I am loved, that I am free." And Thomas, the one who had always questioned, now felt a new sense of trust. "I will rest in the love that is always with me, even when I don't have all the answers." Jesus looked at each of them with love, his heart full of pride for the men who had followed him so faithfully, despite their struggles and doubts. He knew that the path ahead would not be easy, that there would be challenges and trials. But he also knew that they were ready to face the world with hearts full of peace, minds full of clarity, and souls full of love. As they set out on their journey once again, the disciples carried with them the greatest gift Jesus had given them, the gift of mindful awareness, the gift of being present in the moment, and the gift of knowing that no matter where they went, God's love would always be with them. And in that love, they had found the peace that surpasses all understanding. This is end of the story. Please like this video and subscribe this channel for more Jesus story like this. May the God watch over you.